This is the Business, Innovation and Technology podcast. The mythos surrounding NFTs is as captivating as it is palpable. Yet, with each new frontier come new normals, a chance to make room for the marginalised and the underrepresented. Today, Jess Liao, Manager of Solutions Engineering, Applied Research and Development here at Meta, moderates a panel discussing the social impact of NFTs, with guest speakers Maliha Abidi, Elissa Maercklein, Lieber, and Renfei. They'll be discussing the unique space of NFTs and the unique opportunities they're creating. I'm Jordan Rogers-Smith, and I'd like to welcome you to our show.
NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, experienced exponential growth within the last year. Web3 itself is estimated to be a $10 trillion industry in which men currently represent the bulk of those participants. Large corporations, including Meta, announced the support of NFTs on their platforms. Historically, women have been conditioned to be risk adverse. If we don't step in now, women will miss out on a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. With the rise of Web3 and NFTs, we have the opportunity to build the world that we want to be in, to define that direction, and to drive positive social impact. So in order to do that, we need to close the gender and race gap. My name is Jess, and I'm a manager on the Solutions Engineering Applied Research and Development team. I also co-founded the Women in Web3 group here at Meta, and I am humbled and honored to moderate a talented pool of creators and leaders in the NFT and Web3 space. So shall we begin? Each of you have had a tremendous impact and continue to open doors for women in the NFT space. Can each of you give a brief introduction of yourself and tell us how you got involved in the space?
Hi everyone, my name is Maliha Abidi. I'm an artist, an author, and an activist, and also the creator of Women Rise. And my journey in the NFT space started in last summer, even though it feels like it's been 10 years. But yeah, it's been quite incredible. I don't think still we have, while I've seen like incredible things in this space, I don't think I've seen the full potential of NFTs and Web3 just yet. But I do agree with Jess that, you know, it's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity that women and the most marginalized need to be a part of. So that's what I'm excited to see in the future.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Em. I started my career, so to speak, in the NFT and crypto world back in 2012. I was in the Bitcoin Club at Carnegie Mellon, where I was a student. And after I graduated, I started working for Visa, which is a very large payments tech company. And for those of you familiar with how the world of payments work, there's a lot of parties that are involved in anytime payments flow across the world, cross borders, and exchange currencies. And so that's when I really started to understand the applications of cryptocurrency and how blockchain can have remarkable impacts on people's lives. That was more from an investor perspective. I didn't really get into the world of NFTs until like August of this year. And what I loved about it is the community perspective, the way that people can enter into a space that historically has been a little bit scary and a little bit closed off if you don't have a finance background or a tech background, and create this really warm and inclusive environment within communities where people can learn about new technology and ask questions that they don't feel like they're dumb questions. And so I started my career in NFTs as just a collector, an investor. And one of the cool things about the industry is that there's incredible opportunities to get involved beyond just being a participant or an investor. And so excited to be here today talking with this panel about women in Web3, how we can make the world more diverse and inclusive as we expand into the metaverse beyond just this physical real world.
So I 100% agree with Anne and everybody. My name is Renfei. I'm a business engineer from Meta team. Been here for about 5 years. I think I started with crypto around 2017. That was the time, everybody just got into it, got a little bit crazy. And then gradually I realized that actually lots of these communities, as I mentioned, they're for the social good. They didn't actually get resources, right? And actually, relatively speaking, for those focusing on monetization, they got way more resources. So I figured out, well, that's definitely a problem, right? And the last year for an NFT, the global sales was about 20 $4.9 billion. It was a lot of money, but vast majority of those were driven by sometimes speculations, and also not to mention the fraud and the scam involved, right? I feel like as someone coming from the engineering community, I do want to make sure that we pay attention to those who are actually using the NFT for good. So this year, I kind of just make it more of a personal mission to actually work on enabling lots of these charity organizations, and also internally, externally, just make sure that we're using the NFT for good. So that's why I got into this space.
Great, and I'll follow up. I'm Maddie. I'm a program manager at Meta. I originally, started my career in this kind of interesting niche between learning and development and strategic operations, really just looking to be, involved in business and tech and figure out kind of what career paths there were for me. And because of that, I obviously started investing in crypto a number of years ago, but I hadn't gotten involved in NFTs until the end of Q3 maybe of last year. Which was just a fantastic way to bring together both kind of my work life and then also passion on women's issues and art and creative outlets in general. So I've really loved being involved in the space, and I'm really passionate about getting more women into Web3. I co-founded the Women in Web3 group at Meta with Jess.
Amazing. What a panel. We're only scratching the surface with the potential of NFTs and Web3. Now couldn't be a better time to get involved and to make the world more diverse and inclusive. How do you see NFTs playing a role in accessibility for social impact?
I feel like there are a few things that the NFT space is allowing, that a few things that are happening in this space that are allowing for, for us to be able to advance human rights or social justice. One of the most obvious ones is due to the wealth that's available in this space, or the amount of wealth that, like the wealth transfer that we're about to see, for example, or we are seeing. I feel like a lot of the nonprofit organizations, especially grassroots organizations, they don't have to jump through so many hoops to get the funding to benefit their communities. That's just one of them. But then there's also like a revolution for artists who have been struggling. There's like the stereotype for artists, like starving artists, struggling artists. So I feel like this is a revolution for artists, that the middleman is being removed, and then there's just the artist and the collector, or the artist and the art lover. And then, you can just kind of imagine financial independence for so many through this. But specifically for, like, if we think a little bit outside of the US or the UK, or like a little bit outside of like the traditional spaces where we're so used to seeing crypto or NFTs, I feel like it has such a big potential to advance human rights, advance women's rights, fund girls' education around the world. So at the moment, there are 258 million children who are currently out of school. 129 million of them are girls. And that number may seem like, okay, so it's about 50-50. Boys leave school, or their education is being compromised in these situations way later than girls. And in many cases, girls are not even getting a chance to get educated. So I feel like the Web3 technology can be leveraged to make a change in that. But also sometimes financial issues are not the only problem. But I do feel like for millions and millions of women and girls around the world, Web3 can be an incredible space and can lead them to liberation on so many levels. And NFTs can be a great gateway for that, because NFTs are sort of like a bit more digestible to people, a bit more like easier to understand, I guess, because it's a really it can be a bit complex space. Like there can be some some people who may feel intimidated by it. Is this the right question? Should I even be asking this? Will I be judged for it? Or just feeling intimidated by the fact that, okay, like I don't belong. And I was one of those people. I was like, crypto, tech, finance, like what am I supposed to do with it? Like I'm an artist, I have nothing to do with that. But NFTs were something that I very naturally saw myself being a part of because of, the art side of it. So similarly, whether you're a creator, whether you're a collector, whether you want to be a part of a community that you resonate with, not to mention so many diverse NFT projects that are coming out that you probably can see yourself in, can be a great gateway for people to get started. And that can be a roadmap for a lot of people to lead social justice or create social good in their communities.
I want to agree with what everything Maliha said. I think one of the most interesting things to me personally about NFTs is the opportunity for people who would traditionally be excluded from the tech world to get involved and to really get their foot into the water of what is Web3. So for myself, I've spent my whole career in Silicon Valley working for big companies, but the vast majority of my career building startups. And I know that if you haven't gone to a top school, if you don't have a degree in computer science, it can be incredibly hard to break into that industry. There's thousands and thousands of job applications, and you just look at the names and the pedigree and what they have done in their experience, and it can be so hard to get to know the person behind that. And one of the really cool things about NFTs is we're creating this global network of people from all around the world that wouldn't traditionally have opportunities to get involved in the tech industry. They can become collectors, investors, but then they can, with their passions, they can be artists. They can be people who are in marketing, people who are in recruiting. They can be engineers. They can be leaders. There's so many opportunities for financial inclusion and for the opportunity to get involved in this new industry that traditionally people have been excluded from. And so there's a whole new opportunity for, instead of retroactively trying to apply these principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is what the tech industry is doing right now with Web3, it's so new. It's in its infancy stage right now, where these principles can be baked in right directly from the beginning. So I think that's a huge opportunity. And there's also, with another lens, the way that, as Maliha said, a lot of these NFT projects and organizations are really having a lens of social impact directly baked into what they offer to the world. And it's been amazing to see how many of them aren't just doing huge checks to nonprofit organizations for the tax write-off, right? As we know, a lot of times donations can be, but there's really actually people who are genuinely passionate about partnering with these organizations, driving change. And with the global aspect of NFTs, we have a huge global community of people that, with the proper education, with the proper understanding of how to approach these topics and these issues, they can drive change at a localized community level. So I think there's a huge opportunity ahead of us for how we can be more inclusive within the tech industry and also use that inclusiveness to drive more social change all around the world.
Yep, 100%. I think, speaking of what is in front of us, right? Over the past few months, many big tech companies already announced that they're going to support NFT on their platforms, one way or another. And Meta will also become, as our CTO mentioned, right, more and more blockchain compatible. So I think that means that people will actually have access to NFT projects for good on all of these services, accessible to billions of people, right, literally. And I think from the other perspective, let's say banking, right? Still, vast majority of the global population don't actually have access to high quality or trustworthy banking. So this is some problem that has been discussed, since the very beginning of Bitcoin, et cetera. And it's interesting if you check the population, like the ratio of people owning active wallets. It's of course, developed countries, right? You have a pretty good percentage, but also on the other extreme, you will see countries like, let's say, Ukraine or something. They have more than 10% of the people actively using cryptocurrency, right? So it gives you a sense that when people don't feel enough trust in certain institutions or their local banks, they kind of turn to crypto, right? And these people would also have access to the group projects, right, backed by an NFT. So I'm just very excited about that. And I think there's also an interesting trend I'm looking at right now. Again, speaking of accessibility, I got friends who just became NFT creators these days. It's because it's just so easy, right? You create some kind of picture, you go to some of these open marketplaces and mint an NFT, right? And then they promote some cause they deeply care about. So I felt like all the way, like you two have mentioned, it's just more intuitive somehow, and it's cooler. I guess that's appealing to the younger generation. So I think NFT has done a really good job just making all of these social impact projects more accessible to the general public.
Yeah, I think I look at it from an organizational development perspective, right? And in Web 2 and more traditional corporate structures, it takes a lot of work for social impact organizations to get off the ground because there are so many hurdles for them, right? So even things like like basic transparency in the way that they're running their organization and verifying that they're actually doing good work are really, really hard. And then things like, huge marketing budgets required to get access to the groups of individuals that you would need to support your organization, and like rigid expectations around organizational bloat, decision making, all of these things are then directly made easier via Web3 ecosystem technologies like blockchain. It verifies that you're actually doing good work. You can use DAOs for community-led or community-driven decision making. And overall, the whole point is that there's this increased transparency available to everyone to verify everything that you do. So it basically takes away some of the big foundational problems that we have with large-scale social impact organizations in the Web 2 world or normal world. And then on top of that, NFTs particularly help you to actually build a strong community movement by providing something of value that can continue to grow in value back to your supporters, right? And so it isn't just people doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, it's also people getting value and buying into a social impact movement almost like they would buy stock in a company, which I think starts to position the opportunities here in a really interesting way. And so I think Web3 NFTs are pretty essential to making it much easier to start up and do good work yourself, but then also support really good work that's being done by others.
Amazing. This space is incredible, and the potential is just so huge on so many dimensions when we talk about financial accessibility, inclusion of people of all backgrounds, increased transparency and trust in our systems, and truly at a global scale. This is big. How do you see NFTs as a catalyst for helping introduce more women into Web3?
Great question. I think that there's still this misconception for a huge number of people in the world that stems all the way back from 2011 with the Silk Road, when Bitcoin was being used to buy drugs and money laundering. And it has this whole dark web connotation that I think not everyone has completely dispelled yet from their mind. And so this application of blockchain that's a little bit more fun, it's very inclusive and has more tangible real value that people can understand, such as NFTs, is a really great way to get over this mindset of cryptocurrency is the dark web where bad things are happening that you should stay away from. And I think it's really interesting where we've found this application of blockchain where women can get involved and get involved in communities that they can meet people just like them, and also people that identify in different genders, to be able to connect with and learn from. It creates this whole community ecosystem that can be very warm, very inclusive and inviting, where people don't feel quite so alone as they log on online and try to figure out how everything works. And I think more and more as the applications of NFTs evolve and develop into how are we viewing NFTs as access passes or membership, or how are we creating contracts using NFTs, the more real world applications that come out, the more and more women will see, okay, there is more to this whole system and blockchain and as a whole, using NFT as kind of a stepping stone to get into that. It makes it a little bit less scary to think about NFTs if you're looking at it, oh, okay, if I own this specific token or this specific piece of artwork, that then gives me access to exclusive benefits with brands that I already know and love. I can get physical products, I can get discounts, I can get an online wearable version that if I go to an event or I go to a party and I meet my friends from all around the world in one metaverse environment, I can have these clothes that represent what I already wear in real life and in the metaverse. And so creating these ways to make it seem more familiar and understand how the applications can work, I think is a really great way to help women understand, and not just women, let's be honest. I think there's a lot of people in the world that are still a little bit scared of blockchain and how they can understand how it all works, and just creating these safer environments where people can learn the basics and then use that as a stepping stone to get into what is the deeper world of Web3 and how can we apply these principles beyond just NFTs.
I feel like that when we like start to even think about this question, there's like we need to understand that there's a certain level of privilege that comes with even like you stepping into this space, whether you're a man or a woman. So not everybody has access to, let's say, information is like secondary. Not everybody has access to like Wi-Fi or even the time. So like, let's say even if you do have like a smartphone, computer, Wi-Fi, some women don't even have the time to kind of like, have like just be able to kind of like, okay, today I'm gonna Google what Web3 is, what NFTs are. Specifically thinking about, let's say, single moms or stay-at-home moms, like they just don't have the time. And I think one incentive that we can kind of incorporate in these conversations when we are trying to onboard women and girls into this space is that you don't have to, and also culturally, like women are kind of like people kind of sometimes in some cultures they don't even allow women to have anything outside of what they're supposed to have in their family life. Like if you're married or if you're a mother, that's like what your life is supposed to be. Otherwise, everything else that you want to do is like not very female like of you to do. So like thinking about that privilege, like if you are in this space, it is a certain level of privilege that goes into it. And if we are truly thinking about a decentralized world and not just like a decentralized US, we do need to think about like all of these different cultural things that we need to keep in mind. One thing I think, well, how we can shift the culture around it or shift the conversation around it is perhaps starting the conversation at like a bit from the beginning and saying, why is it going to be helpful if you support your wife, if you support your daughter, if you support your sister getting into this space? And I think that's a responsibility of men and women. So it's not just like a responsibility of just like one group. Um, and then also kind of talking about the fact that, okay, to get you started, you don't have to compromise on, like you don't have to change too much in your life. This is something you can do at home, like at least start learning about it, just take a look at it, like, just kind of encouraging them to take baby steps, because just even hearing about these things like blockchain, Web3, these are normal to us now because we have been in this space for a while. But even we are learning, right? It can get overwhelming, it can get intimidating. So in terms of like answering or using like I love the word that you use, like catalyst. How we can use that is like really thinking that you need to like imagine talking to somebody who doesn't have the privilege of even imagining themselves in this space due to what their life looks like. So I feel like there needs to be different plans for different sorts of women because not all women are in the same situation. So I absolutely love what Elissa said. And while that plan is amazing for one group of women, we need to come up with like several more just so that we can make sure that this space is not leaving people behind. Um, and and yeah, so that's what I would like to add.
I love that you're talking about education from a learning and development background. Obviously, that's an area that I'm super passionate about and that I spend almost all day, every day in my real life normie job thinking about. And it's really interesting. There are a couple things that are, studies indicate to be foundationally true about the way that women learners learn differently than, people who are from a more traditional, men than men do, really, as like a block of learners. So it's basically two things. Women tend to learn best in cohort environments, so social based learning. And then they also require a significantly higher level of perceived confidence and competence. So the competence and confidence that they themselves think that they have to actively participate in a new skill, a new industry, a new topic. And those things are relatively common across women, regardless of their geographical background, religious background, basically any of the identity markers that we may consider. And so when we think about bringing new women into this space, we need to not only expedite the speed with which they learn, but also shorten the duration of that learning journey so that they can participate more quickly. But the way that we get there as Maliha was saying, is going to need to be different for every person, right? Every person cares about different things. They ascribe societal and social value to different items. And so the analogies that you need to use to onboard people into this space can look very different. And the plan with which you do that, as Maliha was saying, is going to need to be different depending on the situation. Some people may need a lot of high touch interaction and one-on-one mentorship. Some people may need an e-learning curriculum and modules that they can come back to on their own at any time, even if it's 11:45 p.m. and they have 5 minutes where their kids aren't bothering them in the bathroom, So building solutions that make sense for everybody and make education more equitable are going to be really important for bringing more women into the space.
Yeah, I think I can probably briefly talk about the role of men play in this space, right? And I think in Web 2 or the IT industry as we know right now, the mistake has been made, right? Even arguably the first batch of engineers were actually women, like Ada. Like we read this from textbook, right? Like she was coding, like she was building the software, etc. But gradually, culture shifted, everything shifted, and then it became more of a kind of man-dominated area. And I think Web3, this is sort of a second chance, right? And I think not only on the consumption side, on the supply side, like creators, artists, and also the users or whoever appreciate the art. I think from the tech industry, like within, we also need to think about it, right? How can we introduce more of the kind of female engineers into the space? Let them build new startups, right? Let them work with, and because there's still a problem, right? Web3, even though it's a new thing, it grew out of the Web2, right? You can argue it's incremental or not, but the talent is definitely it's the same around the same group of people coming from the Web2 space. So I felt like moving forward, not only focusing on the product side and engineering side, and this is also something I learned from from you guys. I will try to have this kind of conversation more and more as well. Just make sure that on the talent side, we also bring more women into the space, more diverse thinking.
I love it. So many good points talked over here. So you mentioned like breaking down that historical misconception that cryptocurrencies is this dark web. Renfei, you talked about the previous Web 2 revolution and how women were part of that originally and then were kind of bombarded by men. Maddie, you talked about like the way women learn is a little bit different, and in order to get to that point, we need to expedite the speed and shorten that learning journey. And that path is going to be really different for each of us. And Maliha, like the privilege, reminding us that the privilege it's inherent into stepping into the space, whether it's through equipment, it's through accessing Wi-Fi, culturally, or time, the most scarce resource of all. What kind of opportunities in terms of jobs, businesses, and audiences might women have in the NFTs and Web3 space that they don't have anywhere else?
I think everything, honestly. Like, I think what the roles and the jobs that exist in the real world in Web2 space, that, but also like in Web3 space, they will exist. And that's something that I really want to emphasize for people, because sometimes when I'm talking to them, especially women, they're like, oh, so like I'm not an artist, so like, or I don't have like a huge amount of money to become a collector even. What should I do? Is there anything in this space for me? Whatever you're doing in the real world or like outside of the Web3 space, you can do that in the Web3 space and be a part of it. And that's something that I really want to emphasize. But on top of that, I feel like there are so many different roles that are just kind of, you will come across by just even becoming a community manager. Like I've been in the Web2 space. Like I've had a community, like art community, for over 10 years now. Putting art there, like building a community, talking to people online. I've never had a sense of community like I do in Web3. Firstly, everybody knows. It's like living in a small village. Everybody knows everyone, and it's super fun. But then opportunities do come out of them. Like Women Rights team is expanding. All of like other than the founding team members, the people that are on our team came from our community, and and like their day job or their real world job is completely different, and what they're doing at Women Rights is completely different. sometimes we're doing, like, as members of this community, we're doing jobs that don't even have a title. So what I would suggest is, like, being a community member is like the best way to start, and then experimenting and seeing, like, you may be surprised by yourself as well, because, like, even though I'm an artist in this space, I am doing like several things that I didn't even know that I could. And then I've seen like so many other people excel in so many spaces without having a title of their job, just because Web3 has pushed them to recognize their potential. So I would say just start, and I think you will find the answer to that.
Yes, Maliha, I love your answer. And I just want to pile on to that a little bit and reiterate how wonderful I think that answer was. I think one of the super interesting things about Web3 is the whole world of crypto blockchain started with an anonymity, right? All the way back to Satoshi and Bitcoin. And with that, I think there's a really cool opportunity to eliminate a lot of the credentialism that we experience in real life. So you can operate behind a completely anonymous avatar, work your butt off, and grind all the way to being a leadership position in an organization. And it doesn't matter what you look like, what your nationality is, what school you went to, what your professional history is. And so there's a really cool opportunity there. Every single job that exists in Web 2 also exists in Web 3. We need people in HR, we need people in operations and finance and accounting, engineering, front end, back end, full stack, everything. And I think that's really cool from the eliminating all of these intrinsic biases that we have perspective. However, it does mean that we need to be incredibly thoughtful and making sure that in this world of anonymity, historically and statistically, it has been represented by one primary demographic. And so we need to be thoughtful and mindful to make sure that we are finding people that can be brought up into leadership positions that will then represent diverse ways of thinking, diverse opinions, because they come from different backgrounds. So that's one of the kind of like good and bad things of Web3 in this world of anonymity. It's so easy to have a very homogenous group representing because you can't see who's behind the screen. But with that, I think one of the interesting things that we talked a little bit about earlier as we were speaking is that there's a huge opportunity for women who have been excluded from the workforce through the pandemic. There were millions of women who lost their jobs, who had to stay home because they were the primary caretaker for their children who weren't going to school. And that option of getting back into the workforce by staying at home and getting involved in a part-time basis in a community, such as Maliha mentioned, there's opportunities to get involved just as an active community member and then grow into a leadership position. And so not only from an investor collector standpoint, where there's an incredible amount of wealth creation that can be afforded to women who aren't in the workforce right now, in the formal workforce right now, there's a lot of opportunity to get involved and be engaged from a career path perspective within these communities. And so that opportunity is what I'm most excited about, the opportunity to bring folks who would traditionally not get opportunities in the tech industry into this world. And hopefully that will help us build a more diverse landscape as we build and grow Web 2. Because as Renfei said a little bit earlier, there are a lot of people from Web 2 who have moved into Web 3. And it's just a matter of getting the people who were excluded from Web 2 also in Web 3 to make sure that we can have a more representative ecosystem as we build and grow the future of how do we operate online.
I really want to also emphasize the importance of being anonymous in the space, because this is my personal experience. I have been using Discord pretty heavily. For those who don't know, this is a service, a social network group messaging service where you don't really show real identity, right? You use avatars and all that. Use like fake names. I really thought the experience would be very chaotic, right? Because people are not showing out their real identity. They might talk differently. But then I was completely shocked. At least in the servers I was involved, I'm an immigrant, I'm Asian. But when I'm in this, like when in an anonymous social network service or the NFT space, where privacy is kind of baked in, right? Since for Web 2, privacy was like an afterthought. People were like, oh, this is actually not good, right? Let's take care of the privacy issues. But Web 3, it's actually baked in, right? Everybody thought about it when they build the Web3. They're like, okay, it got to be anonymous. Nobody should know who I am. The wallet should just be a random string, and that's it, right? So I felt like I can actually have better conversations to a certain degree in a anonymous identity. And I think for minorities in general, and kind of more from a global level, you can show up like in different culture, different environment without being judged by your look or your gender and all that, right? So I'm actually personally very excited about that, I think.
Yeah, and also just to build on what Renfei was just saying, it's also like builds such a like a filter and safety wall around activists, for example, because we have seen in like so many countries that you cannot even like if you openly talk about your opinions or talk against like let's say in the Middle East, let's say you talk against like um, the authorities, um, you will be jailed. So you or if you're talking about women's rights, I know so many women activists who have been jailed, who have been targeted for this very reason, and then I know a few who remained anonymous, and they could never find them, and that came from that like being able to stay anonymous on Web 2. And I think Web 3, there is this safety for people, for activists, for people who just may not feel so comfortable being, let's say, dogs. So I do yeah, I love that Renfei like emphasized on that, and I think that is one of the best things about Web 3.
I think it's interesting when you think about Web 2, the women for barriers to get involved are high, and the women for barriers to be successful are also high. And when you look at Web3, the barriers to get involved are being lowered on a regular basis, and the barriers to being successful are significantly lower. And part of that is about the anonymous nature of the space. Like I think back to when I was in customer support in very early stages of my career, and we were on a chat service, and all men changed their names to like more women identifying names, and vice versa. And the men just started being like terrorized by the ads customers that we worked with, and it was really interesting to like have statistical evidence that women encounter significantly more friction, have opportunities taken away from them. And when you look, it's unfortunate, of course, that we live in a world where that happens. But then when you look at the anon leaning environment in Web3, you lean much more heavily into valuing people based on their ability and valuing people based on their contributions, rather than tying that to your identity. And that helps to open up opportunities for women that may have been the same doors that were closed on them in Web 2. So I think it's both. There's all the opportunities that you have in Web 2, and the ability to access and get those opportunities is made a little bit better in the Web3 ecosystem.
The conversation continues in part 2, when Jess asks,
what do you think is still needed to make Web3 in the NFT space more accessible to new creators and participants?